For today's video, I want to highlight the top performing plants that I've personally kept in my cold water aquariums over the winter months. The information in this video isn't based on the plant's Wikipedia pages or their species profile pages on various plant nursery websites. It's based on my personal experiences, and you'll see each plant in my own tanks as we work through the video. It's worth mentioning that these are technically temperate tanks that are kept at room temperature, which averages 18 degrees Celsius or 64 degrees Fahrenheit during the winter months, but a lot of these plants can survive in lower temperatures, and we'll cover that as we work through the video. The first plant that I want to feature is Pearlweed, because this thing is an absolute powerhouse. Unlike a lot of the other plants featured in the video that slowed their growth rate during the winter months, Pearlweed just kept growing at a very fast pace. You can see the Pearlweed purling in the video clip, which happens due to it photosynthesizing so rapidly that it actually releases more oxygen than the water can dissolve, resulting in the small bubbles you can see in the tank. Although many plant nurseries list Pearlweed as an advanced plant, I've been growing it in a low-tech tank under a very cheap light that I link in the description without any CO2 injection, and it's absolutely thriving. I did use some liquid fertilizers in this tank around 9 months ago because it was originally a shrimp tank, and back then the shrimp colony was too small to sustain it with their bioload due to its rapid growth rate. But since then the shrimp have bred and the colony is larger, and I've recently added a couple of Medaka rice fish as well, so I'm not using any liquid fertilizer, and I haven't used any for probably over 6 months. One issue with Pearlweed is that it can often come in these small in vitro cups to reduce the risk of pathogens or snail eggs being on the plant. Unfortunately, there is a downside to this, and it can cause the plant, regardless of the species or genus, to be more susceptible to high ammonia levels when the plant is first planted in the tank. Due to this, it's always worth monitoring your tank's water parameters if it's a new setup, and perform water changes if your ammonia is 0.25 ppm or above, because it can affect these in vitro plants very quickly and cause them to melt. There's no need to try and propagate Pearlweed, and it will happily spread in every direction and slowly start taking over your tank. That's why I personally only keep it in Pearlweed jungle tanks like this one, where it's the only plant in there, and the only maintenance I need to do is manage its height to guarantee swim space for my fish. You can use this in other tanks that have other plants in there, but you will need to do weekly maintenance to trim it back to prevent it dominating the other plants, and this can't be skipped because it is a very fast grower, even in cold water. Now, buying Pearlweed can actually be more tricky than a lot of people think, because it's sold under a lot of different names. Here's a list of what's considered the real names for Pearlweed at the time of recording, and you can pause the video and take a photograph of these and make sure the plant you get matches up to either of these Latin names. Technically, the first two names on this list are synonyms for real Pearlweed, which is now unfortunately extinct, and the plant we actually buy in the hobby today is Micranthemum glomeratum. As far as I know, Hemianthus glomeratum isn't actually a real plant, even though some plant nurseries do sell Pearlweed under that Latin name. It's also worth taking note of the names on the screen now, with the Latin name on the left and their common name on the right, because these are easily confused with Pearlweed because of their names and how similar the plants look, but these are not Pearlweed, and some of them can be difficult to grow. Next up is Sagittaria subulata, commonly known as Dwarf Sagittaria or Dwarf Sag, and it's a very versatile plant that can serve in the foreground of a medium-sized aquarium or the mid-ground in a nano tank. It spreads via stolons, so be aware that it will continue to send out runners, so you have to remove them to manage its growth and prevent it taking over, but its growth rate is slower than something like Pearlweed, making it a lot easier to manage. Although Dwarf Sag is native to the Americas, it has become an established invasive species here in the United Kingdom, as well as Germany and Japan, where winter temperatures can get below 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit. This proves that it is a very hardy plant that's perfect for cold water tanks, and that it can survive in lower temperatures than that I've personally kept it in. I currently have Dwarf Sag in 2 tanks. One has moderate lighting and one has low powered lighting, and in both of them maximum, it thrives. It is worth noting that I've only ever grown this in hard water tanks and I've never tried it in a soft water tank, but I've never needed to use liquid fertilizers or CO2, the plant just grows. Tropica and most other plant nurseries say that this plant can get to anywhere between 5 and 30 centimeters, but most people will have this plant stay small. I have seen a few different theories on why it has such a wide range for maximum height, but the dominant theory is based on tank lighting, with it grown taller in low light tanks. My personal experience seems to back this up too, as the plant is slightly larger in my low light tank, but it's still very small. This is my first time keeping Dwarf Sag in any of my aquariums, and these tanks are fairly new, so I haven't seen its summer growth rate yet. However, the leaves have grown taller and it started to send out plenty of runners during the winter months, so I'm just expecting this to speed up as things get warmer. Keep in mind there are a few different types of Sagittaria in the hobby these days, so make sure you're getting Sagittaria subulata because some of the other varieties can get quite large. Next up is Taiwan Moss, which I've kept slightly differently to every other plant that's featured in the video. Instead of keeping this in one of my aquariums, I actually kept it in a small plastic tub near a window throughout the winter, and it absolutely thrived. This is because it's from an old aquarium that I rescaped and I didn't have a new tank that I could put it into until recently, so I had to leave it in a small tub. Thankfully I have more aquariums now that I can move it into, and I have transferred it onto a moss mat system for carpeting in the foreground, and my friend makes these and sells them on his Etsy page that I link in the description. Over the coming months the moss should spread and eventually turn into a lush carpet in the foreground that is perfect for a low-tech unheated tank, and it's similar to what's happening in some of my other aquariums that use similar systems with moss. But just like all moss, you can also use this to detail your hardscape too, adding pops of green to your driftwood or rocks if needed. Back when I was keeping this in the small plastic tub, I didn't add any liquid fertilizers or supplements or anything like that. It was literally popped on the windowsill and just left to do its own thing. It's also worth noting that the actual room I kept the small tub in is colder than my fish room, and it averages around 15 degrees Celsius or 59 degrees Fahrenheit during the winter, proving that this can survive lower temperatures than my fish room. Next up is Helanthium green, and there is a red version of this plant that is more difficult to grow, so be sure to get the green variant of it. This plant stays small, making it a perfect plant for the foreground in most tank sizes, and just like some other plants on the video, it spreads via stolons or runners, making it an excellent low-tech carpeting plant. It's native to the Americas but can be found as far north as New York State, showing that it can adapt to a wide range of temperatures. I'm currently growing this in a few different aquariums that span a wide range of pHs and lighting conditions, but I've never used liquid fertilizers or CO2 in any of them, and the plant consistently does well for me. It's even been actively sending out a lot of runners during the winter months, with it having one of the faster growth rates, probably the 4th fastest out of all of the featured plants in the video. I haven't kept this in a heated tank yet or had it during the winter months, but I am curious to see what happens as things get warmer, because I've seen other people have a full lush carpet in their tanks with this plant. Unlike Dwarf Sagittaria that I covered earlier, lighting doesn't seem to affect Helanthium green's height much, and it generally tops out at around 2 inches or 5 centimeters, and then it starts just focusing on sending out the runners and spreading. Next up is Littorella Uniflora, and this is a native plant to the United Kingdom as well as a large part of Europe. Since this can handle the outdoor winter temperatures in my region, it has no trouble in my room temperature aquariums. This is also an excellent foreground plant for a lot of aquarium setups, and it stands slightly taller than Helanthium green, but it does have more of an upright growth pattern. In theory, this is also a stolon plant that will spread via runners and form a low-tech carpet, but it really hasn't spread much during the winter months in my tank. Hopefully as things warm up, it will start to send out more and more runners and form a nice carpet in this tank, but Helanthium green that I covered earlier definitely seems to be more consistent, but so far Littorella Uniflora has been very easy to grow to the stage that you see in the video clips, and I haven't used liquid fertilizers or CO2. Next up we have Eleocharis, and there's a lot of different varieties in the hobby that can be used in different locations in your tank depending on your needs. This is Eleocharis Parvula, which is one of the easiest types of Eleocharis to grow, and it's also one of the shorter types, making it perfect for carpet in the foreground of your tank. That said, I've kept this in several tanks and it always takes months to establish itself before it starts sending out runners regardless of temperature. Even in my heated tanks, it still takes ages to do anything. I'm not sure if the slow propagation speed is because it's kept under low powered lighting and that I'm not using liquid fertilizers or CO2, but as you can see in this tank, it did start to send out runners over the winter and it's starting to take over on carpet. As I mentioned earlier, there's a couple of different Eleocharis species in the hobby that can get to different heights, so there's suitable options for the mid-ground and background depending on your tank size. The native ranges of Eleocharis Parvula include parts of Scandinavia and Canada, proving that I can easily handle far colder temperatures and I've kept it in with ease. The Eleocharis genus is actually one of the most widespread plants on the planet, with most species within the genus tolerating at least one cold region within its native range, which lets you use most of the types in the hobby in unheated tanks. That said, some species of Eleocharis do require higher lighting and CO2 injection to thrive, but the Eleocharis Parvula that you've seen in this video clip has been very easy to keep alive, but like I mentioned, it takes a long time before it starts sending out stolons with my low-tech setups. Next up we have Anubias, and there's several different species within the genus that are widely available in the hobby these days, but all of my personal types of Anubias are from the Barteri species. From what I've heard from other people who've kept different species of Anubias in their tanks, the Barteri varieties are the hardiest and easily transition into submerged growth in aquariums. These days you can find a wide range of Anubias Barteri varieties in the hobby, from the absolutely tiny Anubias petite all the way up to the large Anubias Barteri var Barteri, which can grow surprisingly tall over time if you just leave it to grow. Because the sizes of the different varieties vary so much, you're almost guaranteed to be able to find a variety that will work in the foreground, mid-ground and background of your aquarium, and most plant nurseries list the mature sizes for each variety on their plant profile pages. It's worth noting that Anubias is an epiphyte plant, so it should be attached to the hardscape in your tank rather than planted directly in the substrate. One of the best things about Anubias is its ability to do well under low light, helping to keep costs as low as possible because you don't need high powered lighting for this plant at all. I've successfully grown Anubias under two of the most popular cheap low powered lights in the hobby, and I will link to both of them in the description, and it's also done well in both my hard and soft water tanks. Now I want to be clear, I have used liquid fertilizers in some of the tanks that contain Anubias, but that was not for the Anubias plants, it was for the other plants in the tank. Anubias grows extremely slowly regardless of its water temperature, so it really doesn't need liquid fertilizers or CO2 or anything like that. Just leave it alone to do its own thing and it will grow. Propagating Anubias is also straightforward, and you can split the rhizome once it gets large enough to create separate plants that you can then replace on your hardscape to grow. One common issue is that Anubias can be more prone to green spot algae starting to grow on its leaves, which can be more prevalent in the cooler months because of excess nutrient buildup, but regular water changes in your tank can help keep these nutrients under control and reduce the algae growth. Next up is Bucephalandra, and there's a lot of different varieties in the hobby these days, and some of them are a lot more sensitive than others, but the one that I keep in my cold water tank is Bucephalandra Kedegang, which coincidentally is easy to find and relatively cheap, and it's also one of my favourites because it can develop a slight red hue. I want to quickly say that I'm in the United Kingdom and Bucephalandra is cheap and easy to find here, but I've got friends over in Australia who have a nightmare finding this plant, and then if they do find it, it is very expensive, so depending on your country, this might just be a write-off. But like Anubias, Bucephalandra is also an epiphyte plant, so you'll need to attach it to the hardscape rather than planting it in your tank substrate. Most Bucephalandra varieties stay small, usually 10 centimeters or less, making them perfect for adding colour and texture to your hardscape. All varieties of Bucephalandra are endemic to the tropical island of Borneo, but even though it is literally a tropical rainforest island, for whatever reason, at least the Kedagang variety thrives in my cold water setups. Now I do have Bucephalandra Kedagang in some of my tropical temperature tanks as well, and I honestly think the growth rate is very similar between the two, but being an epiphyte, it just has a slow growth rate regardless of what you do. Another advantage of Bucephalandra is that it will grow perfectly fine under cheap, low-powered lights without the need for liquid fertilizers or CO2, and I've kept it in both high and low pH tanks without issue. Just like most other rhizome plants, propagation is straightforward. Once the rhizome is large enough, you can divide it or split it to create additional plants, but with the slow growth rate and small size of Bucephalandra, it can be difficult to do this until the plant is established and grown out fully. Next is Rotala Rotundifolia, which happens to be one of my favourite aquarium plants in the hobby, and being a stem plant, it's best placed towards the back of your tank because it can grow quite tall over time. One of the main advantages of stem plants, regardless of the specific type, is how easy they are to propagate. Simply trim the excess growth from the top of the plant and then replant it in your substrate, and it'll start to grow roots, and then the stem will start to grow again. This means that you can buy a single pot of Rotala Rotundifolia or most other stem plants and then continuously grow new plants from the cuttings, keeping your costs as low as possible. Rotala Rotundifolia's natural habitat goes as far north as Japan, where winter temperatures can dip below freezing, showing it can survive in temperatures cooler than the tanks I keep it in. I do think that out of all of my cold water tanks, Rotala Rotundifolia is probably the second fastest grower out of them all, with Pearlweed being the only one that beats it. But unlike Pearlweed, which can quickly overrun a tank because it will grow in every single direction and just dominate everything, Rotala Rotundifolia has a predictable growth pattern, and it will go up rather than horizontal, making it very easy to manage. If you're familiar with my channel, you've probably seen Rotala Rotundifolia in a lot of my aquariums because it is one of my favourite plants. I've kept it in pretty much every pH condition, every lighting condition. I've used it with and without liquid fertilizers, but I don't use CO2 injection in any of my tanks. It just grows consistently regardless of what tank I keep it in. Next up I have Hygrophila Polysperma, which can be very similar to Rotala Rotundifolia, as both of them are stem plants and they do well at the back of the aquarium, and they are equally easy to propagate by trimming the excess plant and replanting it in the substrate. Hygrophila Polysperma is native to warmer countries, but the species has become invasive as far north as Germany and Poland, showing that it can survive in colder temperatures. In my colder tanks this winter, it's probably the third fastest growing plant that I've kept, and it's only surpassed by Pearlweed and Rotala Rotundifolia. It is worth noting that there's actually two common varieties in the hobby: the regular Hygrophila Polysperma, which is a pale green colour, and the Hygrophila Polysperma rosanovig, which can develop a pink tint. Now technically these are both the same plant, it's just the rosanovig variety is believed to have a virus in it which restricts chlorophyll production, and that's why the plant looks paler. It can have variegated leaves and it can develop a pink hue in the right light. A lot of plant nurseries consider both varieties of the plant as being easy category, but the virus does seem to have other side effects that make that specific version weaker. If you're new to the hobby and specifically looking for a plant that's going in a cold water tank, I'd highly recommend you stick with regular Hygrophila Polysperma instead of the rosanovig variety, even though the pink hue does attract a lot of people. I've grown the regular Hygrophila Polysperma in several low light tanks without the use of liquid fertilizer or CO2 injection, and it does fine with it being a very beginner friendly plant. Next up, I'm actually going to be talking about two different plants at the same time, which are duckweed and water lettuce, because I use both of them in conjunction with each other in a lot of different tanks. Now duckweed does get a bad reputation in the hobby because it's more challenging to manage, and once it's in your tank it is very difficult to fully remove it because a single leaf can replicate. But on the flip side of this, duckweed is one of the best plants in the hobby by far for stabilising water parameters and correcting some common beginner mistakes, so there is a trade-off with that. I have common duckweed or Lemna minor in my tanks, and it's native to a wide range of countries and it covers a wide range of temperatures, and it's grown pretty quickly in my tanks during the cooler months. Water lettuce is still an excellent plant that can offer a lot of benefits when it comes to managing stable water parameters in your tank, and it's also low maintenance and a lot easier to manage. Its long roots also add a nice visual appeal to jungle style aquascapes as they hang down, and my shrimp and snails love grazing on the algae and biofilm that grow on them. Although it is originally from warmer climates, water lettuce has become invasive in colder regions like the UK and Poland, showing that it can survive at cooler temperatures than the aquariums I've kept it in. Both of these are floating plants, and you simply rest them on the water's surface and leave them to do their thing. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. I just wanted to put something out about cold water plants because I looked for a lot of this last year and I couldn't find anything specific to it, or at least where they were showing the plant in their tank to prove they'd actually done it. So hopefully you found it helpful. Thanks for watching and have a good day.